What's up, everybody? Welcome back. I'm your host, Howard, and welcome to Critical Thoughts. I'm doing a follow-up video from the last video that I did a couple weeks ago when I was discussing the 13 colonies. This video here is going to go in a different direction, so let's get into it. Now, we all know New England is a region comprising of 6 states, which are Maine, Vermont, New Hampshire, Massachusetts, Connecticut, and Rhode Island. Why is that? That's the question I want to pose. Why is that? I'll tell you why. Because of an ideal. Let's talk about it. Right here on Critical Thoughts. This idea persuaded a group of individuals to travel over 3,200 miles to an area that was already inhabited by a different civilization. Now, what would possess them to make such a journey? The answer may lie in this next clip.
The age of colonization was dawning. France had vast claims in the New World. Canada, the Great Lakes country, the Mississippi Valley. Spain was exploiting the incredible wealth of Peru and Mexico. But England had little to show for her efforts. Although many an expedition had dropped down from London, in 1603, 15 years after the defeat of the Spanish Armada, there was still no permanent English colony in America. But in spite of failures, England's colonial fever had in no wise abated, and London was at the very center of the latest scheme, to plant a colony in Virginia. To London in 1603 came John Smith, now Captain John Smith.
This very idea set the stage for future generations. In order for this idea to work, an agreement had to be made. How to handle disputes, how to establish a foundation in order to move forward, what role each individual would play, and from these discussions led to the creation of the Mayflower Compact.
Farewell to ye, Mayflower, said Brixham with a hoot and a bang. You've been a credit to us in more ways than one.
To keep the Pilgrims and strangers together under some kind of government, the leaders of the Pilgrims wrote a document that became known as the Mayflower Compact. The signers promised to obey the laws that they would make. They elected John Carver as their first governor. In part, the Mayflower Compact reads,
"We, having undertaken a voyage to plant a colony, do solemnly, in the presence of God and one another, combine ourselves together to enact such just and equal laws as shall be thought most convenient for the general good of the colony."
Think about this. An idea that had the resources to change the course of history for 2 different civilizations. The first civilization was nearly erased from existence. They had to relocate and left behind a trail of tears. Their land was stolen, their history rewritten, and treaties violated.
We are people of the first light. In our language, we call it Wampana'a.
And they are the people who have been here for 12,000 years.
We're considered to be a nation of people. What Wampanoag means is people of the East, people of the first dawn. We're one of the first indigenous people to see the sun come up.
I'm very proud to be a native. This is my ancestral land. I have my grandmother's teaching and my culture and my traditions are still here.
So when that treaty was made in March of 1621, which led up to the Harvest Festival being a political dinner, now people celebrate, I think it was the fourth Thursday of the month in November. That Harvest Fest, we really don't know the exact date. We know it probably happened late September, early October, sometime during that time. We know the colonists had a big feast that year. We know Squanto taught them how to plant corn that prior spring. Some of the sources say there weren't even turkey there. They don't mention turkey. They mention fowl, and fowl could have been any type of bird. Could have been duck, could have been turkey, could have been goose. But we know the main staple of that diet was deer meat itself, venison. We really don't celebrate it. It's more or less, we recognize the ones we've lost in the past over the centuries. So that day, actually I'm here at the museum and most of the Native staff who work here are here at the museum. And so we educate the public about that day.
We are here at the Tribal Government Center on tribal lands, where the Mashpee Wampanoag tribe has received their reservation proclamation and will raise the tribal flag for the first time on sovereign land as a sovereign nation.
Can't hear you. How are you? It's Mashpee in the house. All right. Well, today is a very ceremonial, symbolic day of our tribal nation standing on our tribal lands, on our reservation. Today is a beautiful day for us, an amazing day for our tribe.
The second civilization was forced into slavery and held at gunpoint, who was stripped of their language, history, and identity, whose community was bombed, whose ancestor was betrayed, and deprived every opportunity to climb the ladder of success.
On the plantation outside Charleston, where his family has lived for 8 generations since 1672, Norwood Hasty was asked if he thinks slavery was immoral.
No, I don't. Because when a slave came from Africa, he couldn't speak the language. He was totally untrained to do any job at all that would fit in with the civilization. Someone had to take care of him. Someone had to take care of him 24 hours a day. And it's pretty hard to do that unless you owned a person. So I think slavery just had to be in those early days.
Mr. Hasty, what was life like in those early days?
As far as the colored people were concerned, I feel that they were a good bit happier than they are now. They had less in the way of material things. But I can remember back in the 20s, when I was a small boy, they were always singing at their work. They had a great sense of humor. And now today, they just don't seem to care much about that as they used to. And I think they've lost their sense of humor somewhat, which I deplore.
Enslaved people, enslaved Africans are brought to this continent first by boat. 12 million Africans abducted on the African continent, hundreds of thousands brought to the U.S. They come into Boston and New Haven and Philadelphia and Baltimore and Richmond and New York City and New Jersey and then Charleston and New Orleans. And shipbuilding and the commerce around trafficking of enslaved people, the transatlantic slave trade commerce, is what allowed a lot of these coastal cities to thrive. And you can't really evaluate the evolution of New England or the evolution of New York City or Philadelphia or Baltimore without understanding the role that human trafficking, that slave trafficking played.
Now we have to keep in mind, during colonial times back in the 17th century, things was completely different. The Puritans arrived on the Mayflower and established the New England colonies, which was the Providence of Maine, New Hampshire, Massachusetts Bay Colony, Connecticut Colony, Rhode Island Colony, and the Plymouth Colony. Now, the Plymouth Colony was the second successful English-speaking colony in the Americas, following Jamestown in Virginia. Around 1628, the Puritans also established the Massachusetts Bay Colony, just north of the Plymouth Colony. The Massachusetts Colony was created by a royal charter, which regulated the land and also the rights and privileges of the settlers. What made this colony different from all the others was that the governing body did not reside in England. Individuals like John Cotton, Roger Williams, and Thomas Hooker had a profound impact in developing the New England region. Due to the Great Migration in the 17th and 18th centuries, the Europeans had generations of virtual independence to thrive and develop the necessities for social life. Seeking to preserve their cultural identity and attain religious freedom from the church, the Puritans, also known as Pilgrims, who are English Protestant, who wanted to separate from what they considered to be Roman Catholic practices. What are Roman Catholic practices?
Western Europe at the beginning of the 16th century. A Christian society for over 1,000 years, as solid and as enduring as its churches. A whole continent with one faith and one spiritual leader, the Pope. The Church taught, and men believed, that the Pope's religious authority was supreme. He was Christ's representative, responsible for morals, doctrine, and the salvation of the souls of men. The popes were more than spiritual leaders. They were powerful princes, deeply involved in the political affairs of Europe. They could make and destroy kings. Their ambassadors were everywhere. They had their own lands and armies. The Church taught otherwise. It taught that good works were necessary for salvation. It even claimed that the Pope could speed souls on their way to heaven by granting indulgences, remissions of the time men had to spend purging their sins by suffering in purgatory.
Catholics believed in the separation of church and state. The Puritans believed that the state should promote and protect religion, and that religion should influence politics and social life. Catholics celebrate Christmas and Easter. The Puritans condemned the celebration of Christmas and outlawed it in 1647.
The two big questions then about church authority is, what is the church and what is authority? If you don't know those things, you can't know how it works or how it's supposed to work. So let's start with, what is the church? The word ecclesia literally means, in Greek, the called out ones, those who are called out of one thing into another, out of the world into the church. The world in Scripture doesn't mean the planet. That's a good thing, and God created it. The world is the fallen order of humanity. And in St. Augustine's great classic, The City of God, he says there's only two kinds of human beings, and they make together two different groups, organizations, organisms, or bodies. One is the city of God, and the other is the city of the world. And you're a member of one or the other, and they're headed to hell or heaven, respectively. So the church is those who have been called out of the order of the world into the body of Christ. They've been placed in a different place, grafted onto another plant. The blood that flows through the church, the city of God, is a different kind of blood than the blood that flows through the city of the world. So we're placed into a different bloodstream. We're grafted onto something radically new. Protestants think you're saved and then you're put in the church. Catholics think you're saved by being put into the church, like Noah's Ark.
They believe children should be educated for both religious reasons and colonial laws that govern the colonies. Reading was a religious duty. Therefore, the Puritans established the American public school system for the express purpose of ensuring that future generations would be able to read and interpret the Bible for themselves, rather than relying on the clergy for interpretations.
After God had carried us safe to New England, and we had builded our homes, provided necessaries for our livelihood, reared convenient places for God's worship, and settled the civil government, one of the next things we longed for and sought after was to advance learning and perpetuate it to posterity, dreading to leave an illiterate ministry to the churches when our present ministers shall lie in the dust.
In the spirit of these words, the General Court of Massachusetts, in honor of John Harvard, education's Puritan benefactor, established the first college in America at Cambridge in 1636. They named it Harvard College. To the Puritans, religion and education were inseparable. The Bible was law. To interpret the law, all men must be able to read. To read, they must be educated. So, for little folk, education began in the home. It began with the few books that had been brought from England. The family Bible, which every man needed to learn and read for his soul's salvation. The catechism that tested a man's knowledge of his faith and the Bible. An occasional copy of one of the classics in some of the more learned families. And for beginners, a special little book called the Horn Book, usually a child's first introduction to reading. This single page, protected by a covering of horn, contained an alphabet, a benediction, and a prayer.
In 1635, they also established the Boston Latin School. It was the first and the oldest formal education institution in the English-speaking New World. They also established Harvard College in 1642. Today, we call it Harvard University movement. The 17th and 18th century was the period of intellectual and philosophical movement. The Age of Enlightenment refers to European history, when logic and reason rose to supremacy. Thomas Paine called it the Age of Reason. Many critical thinkers at that time saw religion as antithetical to reason. This is also the period when some people believed that Western civilization was born. They view this period as the age that gave way for the age of light to replace the age of darkness. The age of faith is the foundation of the age of reason. A man that does not know his past is a man that has no future. Till next time.